Welcome back to the desk. In this video we're going to be looking at putting a micro USB port into a Plantronics Gamecom headset. Now, you may have seen my previous video where I changed the cable on one of these headsets. This is taking it to the next step, so that if you want to change the cable, you just change the cable. Using the Dremel, we just carefully position and drill out a space suitable for the micro USB port to go into. It's just a case of drilling a series of small holes, and then once you've got a nice line going in, it doesn't have to be terribly precise or level. You can take the scalpel, dig it out a little bit so that it's just big enough so you can get some needle files in there. Then you can use the needle files and slowly but surely get it into a nice straight shape, which, as you can now see, you can put the micro USB port into. Beautiful. Mwah! What a delicious fit. It's important to bear in mind that this thing needs to be secure. And you can see that you need to be able to run the wire. You got to bear in mind the switches that are on the headset, and you got to be careful that when you're gluing this thing in, that you don't hit the center post for the actual bit that clamps the two halves of the headset together, or the radial volume adjustment, because otherwise you won't be able to use either of them. And of course you got to make it strong enough so you can pull the cable in and out. First thing that I did, unfortunately my hand was in the way, is I joined up the left cup ground wire to the ground. That's fairly straightforward. I had to do that because of my previous cable modification. Next up, I removed the existing cable from there because I'm going to be soldering straight on. Now the problem I found here is that these pins are just too small. I cannot solder onto pins this small, and you get to see me have a little bit of a hand rage in the next clip, I believe. Here I am trying my second attempt. I bent some of the pins to 45 degrees to give myself more space for the cable, but whilst running it on there, it clips off, I get angry, and there's some hand rage for you. Very nice. So, my solution? A pre-soldered one. This comes on a little bit of PCB that you can then easily solder onto with any cable you want. The downside, it's very big. So I'm going to try and start off by making it smaller, just chopping off the unnecessary bits out here, then chopping off on there, then taking needle files again and getting it down as close as possible. There are two silver contacts on the board, and I took it down that far and rounded out the corners so that it can fit in here as best as possible. And you can see here that because of the larger board, it's not going to fit next to the radial wheel. So we're going to have to put it on the other side. Now this does mean making another hole. That's not the end of the world. Do exactly the same thing again, mark up the position, drill the holes, needle file to make it bigger. This hole will need to be bigger than the other one to accommodate the PCB, because you've got to think about the depth. The PCB has to be able to jut into the hole slightly so that there's enough room for the cable to go in and out. I took a bit of USB cable I had lying around. This is actually from the Colonial Viper that I made. Solder it onto the board, and just a quick test, you'll see that I connect up that USB cable and the headset lights up and works. Wow, beautiful. It's very important to insulate the board as it's going to be resting on top of the other board. Just a bit of insulation tape is fine. I used a little bit too much there. It should be a lot neater than that. Temporarily fixing it in place, that way it won't slip too much whilst I'm actually fixing it in place. And I've got here some epoxy resin, and that's going to give us the secure anchorage that we need to be able to pull this thing in and out. You pour it out and mix it up. Now, those of you who have been watching my Voyager videos will be familiar with what I'm about to do. Essentially, you want to create a film of the epoxy resin that's going to surround the whole thing without getting any resin into the micro USB port. If you do that, then it's fatal, game over, you're going to have to start again. But you have to be very careful and just draw a window film. This is not the part that's going to be anchoring it securely. This is just what's going to make the headset, dust-proof. You can see a better example here. This is the bad hole I'm now just filling in. I'm just going to rub the epoxy against the edges and create this film. And here you can see that I'm clamping it in. I'm using the crocodile clip here to hold it forward and backward, and the larger clamp was just to hold it vertically so that it was perfectly straight while the epoxy was setting. I decided that the USB cable was too thick, so I removed the outer sheathing, and here you can see that I'm just soldering it directly onto the board in nice, short, neat lengths. And I suggest you do exactly the same thing, because space is at a premium inside a headset. There was a lot of trial and error that I cut out of the video, because you can only have so much length. Needless to say that having the larger board is much easier than trying to do the single port itself. You'd need to have solder paste and a pre-made board to even think about just using a port by itself. Now, here you'll see this is where you're going to do the actual anchoring. I'm taking the epoxy and getting it right underneath the board. This is what's going to hold the port in place when you're unplugging and plugging the cable in. Naturally, this means that it can't be removed, but ideally you wouldn't ever have to take it apart. And here you can see that there's this very slight amount of lip here on the ear cup that just needs to be removed to give clearance for the new port, which is very, very simple. Mark out the space, mark out the outer edges and just slice it out with a scalpel, and then neaten it up with a square needle file. Do up the screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. Take your ear cups back on, just fold it around the outside, feedle the lip into the outside bit, and a little piece de la resistance, a little bit of black paint to hide the epoxy resin. That's the thin brush. I mean, it's never going to be invisible, but it just makes it a bit harder to see unless you're looking quite close. Then, go to your computer, plug it in, bam, slap those on, and listen to some music. Oh yeah, groove that shit. Then, when your dog jumps up onto your lap and you don't want to damage your cable, you just pull the plug, throw the cable on the floor, take off the headset, and you're free to go. It's an interesting alternative if you would rather not have a cable dangling on your headset. Oh yeah, you rub that dog. I'm Raven, and that's all from the desk.